So let's go on to the next one. This one's from MLP Shady Oak Ministries. Says, what are your thoughts on the historical problems found within Islam's origins brought up by Jay Smith regarding all the archaeological evidence for the Quran and Islam as we know it today, tying back to Petra and Ab al-Malik?
Yeah, so you have a problem here, and to get kind of my overview thoughts, you can watch. I had a debate with Robert Spencer on this. Robert Spencer concluded that Muhammad probably never existed. He may have existed as that there was some guy named Muhammad, right. But as far as the stories, the what Muslims believe about Muhammad,
right.
It just has very little resemblance to the same person if he existed at all.
Right.
And the sort of general reason for that is that we have a ton of first century sources on the life of Jesus. Muslims have almost nothing for the first century of Islam, right? I mean, you have to make some very stretched arguments to get a case that this is about Muhammad or that's about Muhammad. Right. And notice the difference, right? You're talking about Jesus. Jesus is a first century carpenter. Right. Why would we have so many sources about a first century carpenter? We obviously made an impact. Well, Muhammad's supposedly going around fighting wars, conquering Arabia, challenging all these foreign leaders, and they're all nervous that Muhammad's coming and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And historically, there's almost nothing. Right. You try and figure out if anything if any of these mentions even have anything to do with Muhammad. Right. You look, Mecca is supposed to be this trade route. You look on the old trade maps, there's nothing about Mecca, right? Weird. And no one can figure out why anyone would go all the way over across the desert to Mecca and then up when there's a trade route that goes right up here. So why is this center of trade and so on? There are these kinds of questions. Then the situation with Petra is that early mosques, all the early mosques that we can find, are not pointing towards Mecca, which they're supposed to be according to Islam. It's the Qibla, the direction of prayer. So you point your mosque towards Mecca.
Huh.
They're all facing a different city called Petra, which is a completely different area. Right?
Oh, weird.
And so the claim is that some person at some point in history just wrote the history of Muhammad.
Right.
And that Muhammad as we know him never existed.
Right.
Some other person who recognized that Jews have something that unites them and Christians have something that unites them, and this makes them stronger, and we need that, and so we're going to invent this mythology of a guy named Muhammad, and it's going to unite our people and help us, and so that's the kind of claim. I haven't made videos specifically on that stuff because I normally don't like making videos unless I study it a lot. And it's kind of a big topic that's involving archaeology and ancient sources and so on.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting. I haven't made any videos on it because I haven't gone through all the sources. It's a lot of material to go through.
Right.
And so I don't have an official position. I do say that I believe Muhammad existed, and I agree with the sort of general overall framework that we find in the Muslim sources.
Okay.
But I admitted in my debate with Robert Spencer, it is kind of rough, and it kind of depends on what your view of certain historical principles is, right?
Right.
Like I had to base I can't base my case on early sources because Ibn Ishaq, their earliest detailed biographical source, is written more than a century after Muhammad's death. Now think about that. We as Christians don't go to any source that's written more than a century after Jesus' death. And that's a source that Muslims say that's a bad, corrupt source. You can't trust that. You have to go to these later sources, or even later. So the sources that Muslims go to are from generally 2 to 3 centuries after the time of Muhammad. They're going to these for their information. And so I can't just say, okay, these sources are good because they're so early. Historians are usually looking for early sources. They're looking for multiple independent sources, right? Not just one guy saying something, but multiple sources saying something. That's the kind of thing you're looking for, and you don't have that with Islam.
Right.
And so the question is, do you have anything else that you can fall back on? And so in my debate with Robert Spencer, I actually had to fall back on the principle of embarrassment, which is if you were inventing something, are there things in the Muslim sources that no one who's inventing something would invent?
Right.
And so I started pointing things like this out, like the satanic verses, right? Muslims spent centuries of Islam trying to explain away the satanic verses. Well, what's the point of putting it in there?
Right.
If you're just going to try to explain it away.
Right.
They spent centuries trying to explain away the Muhammad's relationship with Zainab when he took the divorced wife of his own adopted son.
Right.
Why are you putting that in the Quran and then spending centuries explaining it away?
Right.
If you're just making this up as you go along.
Right.
So I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, there are tons of things. The Muslim sources are filled with things that I just would not have made up.
Right.
And, and the response is, well, yeah, but they're in a different culture, so maybe they would make up things that you wouldn't make up. But we know there are things that bothered them in that culture.
Right.
That bothered them because they spend so much time trying to defend Muhammad against it. So we know they were bothering them. Who's going to make these things up knowing they're causing so much problems?
Yeah.
And so it kind of depends. Your perspective on the historical Muhammad is going to depend on how much confidence you have in certain principles.
Okay.
Like it's not complete. I don't put complete confidence in it. It's not anytime I find something weird, principle of embarrassment or something like this.
Right.
But if there's a long train of things
Right.
that I can't imagine anyone who's not a complete nutcase. And the response here is, maybe they were nutcases. No. If they're inventing all these stories and so on and passing them around.
Right.
And we know they bother them.
Yeah.
Right. What's the best explanation for this?
Yeah.
And the best explanation I've seen is that they're passing these stories on because they knew they were true.
Right.
And so that's why all these embarrassing details were being passed on. They knew they were true, and the reason they're trying to explain them is because they really believe Muhammad's a prophet.
Right.
And they know these things happen, and so they're trying to explain them away.
Right.
Versus they're inventing a bunch of things that are just completely embarrassing about a guy that they're inventing to unite them.
Right.
And so that just sounds weird to me. So I'll say it is a problem, the historical sources. I've debated it, but there's still a lot more to study. But based on what I know now, I still side with the existence of Muhammad and the overall Muslim, just the general history, not a lot of the details, but the overall history of Muhammad. Like, he's born around 570, thinks he's a prophet around 610, dies around 632, things like that. The overall framework. But I do understand that it is on pretty shaky ground when you don't have the sources to back it up.
Right. Okay. That's good.